Okay, so welcome to this week's episode of The Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing you the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol. Okay, so there's actually no Jamie this week because instead we want to put him on the other side of the table and actually give him a chance to share the unbelievable story that he has so far in the sports world. And this interview is actually great. I had so much fun asking Jamie actually about his career, and it was, although slightly weird, and I said some nice things which I may or may not regret, but of course it was amazing to listen to everything he spoke about. And the three things that I think you'll love about today's episode are first, getting your priorities in straight and how to work out what really matters in your life. Second is building a network. Jamie shares unbelievable tips on how to create a network, which has landed him people like Rio Ferdinand and Vinicius Jr. And the third is how to actually get into the sports industry and why working in the sports industry is Jamie's, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, dream job. So without further ado, let's get Jamie on. Well, let's get into the episode then. Obviously very weird for me to be interviewing Jamie, but I'm looking forward to getting into his story. So Jamie, to start off with, I want to know, what is it like and what have you learned from being around some household names like Rio Ferdinand, Vinicius Jr. and Jadon Sancho?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question to start with, just because I think it's a world that when I was growing up as a kid, like looking into the world of football and the world of sport, it was kind of the idea that these guys were heroes. They were like on a different planet, etc. But actually now, having worked with some of them, I've got a bit of a sense of the fact that actually these guys are just normal people. And actually being in and around them, they are very much the normal people. You can have a normal chit chat with them, but they've been incredibly successful at what they've done. And there's lots of people in the world that are successful in different areas and different fields, but obviously theirs is a very public one. They're under a very different type of like scrutiny. They're watched by millions of people every single weekend. The press is always covering them. They have to deal with a very different kind of pressure than a lot of other people who are successful and good at what they do have to deal with. So it's been really interesting just to see like their personalities, where their priorities lie, how they've become so successful. And as much as I've listened to them on podcasts, watched videos of them, actually like hearing them in the flesh and how they work as human beings has been pretty eye-opening.
It's so cool because I think we both say like being around, for me it's business, for you being around like those successful sportsmen is, it just literally feeds off onto you. But are there any like consistent personality traits or habits that people listening might be like be able to pick up on that these successful people have a ton of?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is something I've been able to learn a lot myself from, and I think a lot of people kind of need to take on board, particularly when some of them that are already hit that level of success are a lot younger than maybe other people in business. Like some of the most successful people in business might be 40 plus, and they've kind of had the opportunity to learn and develop as humans and understand what's important to them. But there's 20-year-olds that are massively successful in the football field that have already managed to learn the trait of just not really caring what people think and only prioritizing what's important to them. And I think for me that was like a really important thing, because seeing the fact that they actually were in a world where they were so focused on what they were doing and had their priorities straight, it really didn't affect them what was being said about them in a public sphere. And yeah, I'm obviously not a household name like they are, but they're so applicable to any normal life that anyone's living really, that if you just start blocking out all of the other nonsense stuff that actually is not that relevant to you once you think about it. And I wish that's something I'd learned sooner, to be honest, because if these guys are 20 and they've already learnt it, so really interesting to have seen like their mentality towards other people's opinions.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's such a good message, not only for like having a great career, but actually just having a genuinely quite happy life is being able to just exist without having care about it. And I think that brings me like nicely on to, I always fascinated, like obviously I didn't know you before uni, but I know that both your parents are doctors, like both very like fairly traditional to the certain extent where they want you to go and get a good stable job. So how the hell did you end up from coming to a uni like Durham and deciding that kind of from day one at Durham you had no interest in going into the corporate world?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things I think that happened throughout like secondary school and then during university that kind of set me on a different path from maybe what would have been expected. I think it's important to say like my parents never really said to me like, we want you to go down the medicine route. It was never really that that was a pressure. I actually dropped sciences after GCSE, so never took them at A level, so there was no chance of that. That was written off quite soon. and throughout like the whole childhood, etc., of course I had an interest in sport, but never really saw it as something that maybe I could work in. And I think that was actually more down to my school rather than my parents. I think the school I was at, and I know we've had a couple of guests on that were also at it and have said similar things. It was very much a focus on traditional careers, like the lawyer stuff, of course, but it was massive on medicine. They kind of prided themselves on how many people they got into med school every year, probably over how many they got into Oxbridge. But as I said, I kind of removed that as an option for me quite early on. I ended up going to the Oxbridge class because I thought that was the only other option. So I thought if I could do one of them that the school wanted me to do, it had to be the Oxbridge one because I dropped my sciences. And I think when I was going to that, that's something that my parents and I always kind of label as probably a turning point when I realised that that conventional route wasn't really for me. I think I'd always just really gone by the career conventions that school had put on, which only had one type of career, and then the fact they push you down the Oxbridge route, etc. But I went to a few of the Oxbridge sessions and got to the point where I actually applied to Cambridge. And I think part of me did that because of the school, part of me did it because my parents were both Oxbridge, and I felt like a bit of a point to prove, which looking back on it, I was stupid. But I went to a couple of the sessions, got to a point where I was sat next to a guy who had always given me a hard time at school. He always kind of like didn't think I was worth being in set one, etc. But anyway, I won't name him just in case he does listen to this. But he was the
revenge character.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
I can't. I actually have him labelled down to be a top politician one day, so that might give him a clue if he is listening who it is. But I don't want to say him just in case he does end up going where I think he might go. But yeah, he was very opinionated, put it that way. He was sat next to me in the IT suite at school and looked over at my screen as I was submitting my grades. And I think my parents will vouch for this, and my school reports, if you look through them, always said that I was like, labelled me as class clown or whatever. And I think actually, because I wasn't naturally as clever as probably some of the people I was in the class with, I ended up having to work quite hard, but I did quite a good job of like hiding it, and people actually thought I was quite thick. Which is probably a fair assessment in some cases. But he epitomised that because he looked over, and when I submitted my GCSE grades, he said, "You realise they're going to see that, don't you?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I'm like applying." He said, "Yeah, but you can't just lie on your application form." And I hadn't lied. I put my like real grades, but he just had this like total disbelief, and that I'd actually like got those grades. And I think then I was just like, why am I even trying to compete with these kinds of people? He, I think, went off to Oxford, but like all the other people in the room that were applying, I was just thinking like, why am I even trying to bother? I'm not really this personality, I'm not really cut out for it. Like I said, I did apply to Cambridge, that was the application going off, got an interview and didn't get in, which when I got told, and the same day that everyone else got told, I saw a lot of people like in tears and crying. And I remember saying to my parents, I was like, why do I not feel like that upset? And they pointed out quite reasonably that I'd always said Durham was my number one option. That was more because I wanted to do sport, and Durham was known as a sporty university. But they also just said like, you're probably not cut out for Cambridge and Oxford. Like it's changed a lot, and you're right, you're not really like those people that were sat in the Oxbridge room with you. The reason they're upset is because that's like exactly what they wanted, whereas you're not that passionate about it, which was a good indication to me that there's no point even bothering. So by the time I got to university and I'd had a year out of school afterwards, I had fully come to the terms with the fact that I wasn't really going to ever pursue a normal, according to my school, job really.
Interesting. And then like when you got to uni, did you have any idea that the sports world would be where you ended up?
I think the only indication when I first started was that I loved it enough to kind of put aside the fact that I knew I would get stick by choosing a couple of sports modules. And I remember like I was doing social sciences but chose 2 modules in sport because I was like, well, this is an area that interests me. First year, no one takes it too seriously. I was more focused on the other bits around university. So I was like, well, let's just do 2 sports modules. And then I think the label stuck with me. I remember you saying a few times that I was studying sports science, which I wasn't, but I can understand why people said it. But I think that was the only indication. There was never really like a time there where I still hadn't clocked like, I want to work in this.
Yeah, and I think that's so fair. Like I think like a lot of, you see all these kind of like 19-year-olds killing it online, but actually you get to uni and you meet all these like great people, and it's like, it's cool to have a thought of like pursuing things that are interesting, but at the same time, like just enjoying the sport aspect and enjoying the social side. Like I'm sure we can, many people listening can attest to us both enjoying the social side of that. And I think that's like, I don't like. Would you change that aspect at all, or would you wish you got your head down earlier?
Oh, such a good question. I really don't think I would change it, because a lot of the times now where I look back at some of the, it's not really like a skills, but just more like the personal side, because I end up with the job that I'm doing now, I end up speaking to so many people, and I think if I didn't have some good social experiences behind me, I just wouldn't be able to do that. Like there's actually a lot of people within sport that I can relate to around that different stuff that they did during a certain age or a certain period of time, whether they went to university or not. And I also came out of university with like one good experiences, managed to throw myself into all aspects of university. A couple of like the work opportunities I took on at university were because of the social side, and also of course a good group of mates. So I don't think I would change it. Whether it's like held me back or not, I don't know. I think maybe there's times where I missed out on certain stuff that I could have been doing, but I really think a balance is obviously important. I know we've spoken to a lot of guests about like having that balance, and I think I didn't get it right first year. First year was awful. I didn't get any balance there. There was no work really going on. Second and third year, fortunately, I think I thought I did get the balance right.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated, and I definitely want to get into second or third year, because I think as your mate, I definitely saw like a switch between first year and then second year and third year. So I'm very keen to get into that. But let's talk about firstly, just like bring the viewers up to speed with like how did you get that switch? Like what actually happened during? I think it was during COVID that you really like locked onto the sports role.
Yeah, so I always feel slightly bad saying it, because I know it was such like a tough period globally, but I actually feel really lucky that COVID happened, because when it first happened, I was like, oh, I'm missing out on my freshest summer. It was going to be crazy summer holidays, whatever. But COVID came around, obviously missed all of that, and my parents, who were key workers, said you definitely need to go and get yourself a job, and you can be a key worker as well. So I went to an interview with my sister. We both got the job at the local Morrison's. She got put in the store, and they put me in the service station, like at the refueling bit. And I was like, oh, this hasn't started well. And I worked there for maybe 2 weeks. Hated every second of it. Had my little key worker badge to keep my parents happy, and that was about it. Enjoyed none of it. Came back after 2 weeks and just said, look, I don't want to do this. This is a waste of my time. I kind of made a promise that if they let me quit the Morrison's job, I would focus on setting something up for after university, so like really like putting some thought into it and actually like working on something. And I stuck to it, to be fair. I then spent until we went back to university in September, so it must have been from like April, maybe end of April time through to September, literally every day I was blitzing LinkedIn. I think there was a point where I was having probably about 10 phone calls a day, just shooting as many shots as I could, getting a few people that wanted to say like hi and give some bits of advice. Some are more helpful than others, but football and sport is a particularly closed industry, so I just felt lucky to have been able to speak to some of them really. But yeah, that was the switch, and the reason why.
Just quickly to fill in that gap. Like so interesting that you got your head down and were like post Morrison's. I think that's fascinating. But why? How did you know that football was that thing that you were blitzing on LinkedIn? Had you made that decision straight away?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I think I'd seen a few conversations going on during first year around like what jobs people could do, etc. So I'd had very briefly like glanced at stuff and thought like, what would I actually want to work in? And this was before everyone started taking applications seriously, so I wasn't really sure what everyone else was doing at this point. But I'd always been so kind of like obsessive with sport. I had a couple of friends that were big in the sports industry, good cricketers, good footballers, and saw that as an opportunity. Like, you know what, I've always wanted to be in that world. I've never been good enough at sport, so can I still do something in that world? And yeah, I think during lockdown, when I was probably working at Morrison's, again, I was like looking at all the sports stuff, and it was like a big shot that like, you know, the world of sport also came to a standstill. And that had actually a massive impact on the world. I was like, you know, sport has such a presence. There's so many different opportunities going on here. Like, why would I not want to work in it when I love it so much? There's definitely an opportunity here. So And like, of course, I watched the films like Jerry Maguire. I always label that as like my inspiration really for the route I wanted to go down. It's no like meaningful quote or meaningful like book I read. It was purely just watching Jerry Maguire that ever made me think that would be a really cool job. Right, so I can't pinpoint like one specific reason, but it was just like everything around me was always revolving around sport. So why not try and make it into a career? I think that was like the trigger.
I think that's fascinating because I think a lot of I speak to a lot of people who are always like, I really have a lot of motivation to do well, but they have no idea what to actually point in or what direction to go in. And the fact that you knew after that Morrison's job ended that you were going to sit down and go into like sports, I find that interesting, like that was what you went for, because I guess like looking back, what a great decision, and like very happy you've done it. But it's very interesting for people listening who are probably thinking, I know I've just finished uni, or I'm in a job that I don't like. I want to direct myself, but I don't know where to direct myself.
Yeah, it's a real tricky one, because I definitely could have like sat back and just started looking at like what makes the most money straight away, and all the obvious ones would have come up. You know, like could have looked at all sorts in the city and gone down like a full proper lawyer route, for example. I remember I'd always kind of mentioned that at times when I was growing up, like maybe I want to be a lawyer, etc. And yeah, I think so many people that we know are like, they love sport. Like they'll watch sport every single weekend. And even when we were at university, you know, we'd stick on the TV every weekend, and you'd have marathons that would involve golf, darts, football, rugby, cricket, whatever it might have been. It was always on TV. And so I think for me now, like looking back, it's just like, it was such an obvious one. Like, why would I not try? If I'm gonna live 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and then at the weekend turn on sport, why can't I just like kind of flip that narrative? And if I can get into the sports world, I get to do it 9 to 5 Monday to Friday and the rest of it as well. And it's always in the sports world. So yeah, that's why I just think, yeah, sport was a really obvious one for me.
Yeah, and on that, I know a lot of people said to you, myself included, like, you don't want to overlap your passions and your career. Like, I definitely disagree with that now, and I'm interested to see, like, how have you found that? Like, do you disagree with that as well?
Yeah, I was laughing about this with someone the other day, because we were having a conversation about, actually, on the face of it now and on the surface, there is a lot of like the glamorous side. And I think, like, particularly in the last 6 months, I've had more of the glamorous side. But it was the times when I think I travelled 8-hour round trip to watch Peterborough under 18s once, in like a freezing cold. It must have been like January, February. And that was genuinely miserable. Like, I can't even pretend that I enjoyed that. I think looking back on that stuff, I enjoy the fact that I had to put in the hard like yards or whatever to try and make a bit of progress. But when I was sat in that moment, freezing cold, watching Peterborough under 16s, not really getting too much from it because I hadn't really met anyone that was why I'd gone, I was like, yeah, this actually isn't fun. And that's why some people say that when you're so involved in it, you fall out of love with like the actual sport. I find that interesting. You know, maybe I will get there at one point, but I think for me, it's actually made me more and more interested in it, because I've spent my whole entire life, probably thanks to my dad mainly, where every weekend we'd have everything on TV, the exact same as it was at university. But even like we'd have the NFL on Sundays, which of course then links into like the whole NFL, like sports agents was the big kind of start of it all. And then that's what gave me an interest. So if I've had it for 24 years now, I just don't see it ever really removing it as a passion, so to speak. It's just something that I'm always going to enjoy. And I always like remind myself that what's the alternative, right? I could keep sport exclusively to the weekends, but I'd then have to go and find another job during the week. And what would I do?
No, it's so fair. It's so fair. Why not just do it the whole time, right? I'm completely on board with that. And like, so people are probably listening and thinking, like, we've kind of flirted with the fact you're in sport. Let's actually talk about exactly what you did. Like, what are some pivotal moments in the last 2-3 years that have got you to where you are today? And then please, like, explain where exactly where you are today as well.
Yeah, it could be a long story, but to try and keep it as short as possible, I have been a bit haphazard and a bit chaotic. I think there was a point recently on my LinkedIn when I had something like 5 active jobs, plus of course this podcast. So yeah, I think I had 5 active jobs at one point, which was purely just like a bit chaotic, no real like narrow-minded focus, because I wanted to just go for everything. So I said yes to everything, and so following on from COVID, I got an opportunity with the agent of Mesut Ozil. That was the kind of big stroke of luck for me. I've been trying to get a hold of him for months and months. Eventually did, having taken a course of his, and spent the first summer after lockdown with him. Went really well, got along, carried on working with him, and have been working alongside him on different projects for nearly 4 years now. And then the next summer, he disappeared to LA, Ozil left Arsenal. That was all kind of done. He'd made money as an agent, and he's gone to LA with his family. But it meant I didn't have anywhere to go in the summer, particularly. But we built a good relationship, and he said, well, what about on the commercial side? Why don't you speak to Misha Scher? So I'd say Misha was kind of like my second mentor. Luckily, Misha, who's global president at Essence Mediacom on the sports and entertainment, he was working with the likes of Vinicius Jr. and Alessio Russo at the time. And yeah, he said, yeah, I'll take you this summer, come in and look after you. So I carried on with Verkut, plus spent that summer with Misha. That was on the commercial side, so I understood a little bit more about sponsorship and personal endorsements and stuff like that. Then my third mentor, which I now actually have a company, the three of them, called Treble. And they see themselves as like the trio within education, which they are really. They're the industry leaders in sports marketing. So Misha, sports agency, which is Urquhart, and then sports law, which is Daniel, who was my third mentor. I then started doing courses and events with Daniel, and that meant I then had three of the best guys in the industry kind of helping me, and just said yes to everything they offered. But it meant I had good experience in marketing, in law, and on the agency side. And then I've also said yes to some other projects. Like I did some experience with the player care group while I was studying my master's in law, just to see that side, because they look at players very differently. They look at the whole landscape very differently. I worked with like an online app at some point. So it really was chaotic and haphazard, but it kind of gave me a few skills and understanding of the industry. Plus, most importantly for sport is the network. I ended up meeting so many people from different lines of the sports field. I then had the opportunity now at Sports World, where I've kind of stripped back on everything else. And my main focus is with a company called Sports World, who are a big media agency. And they had a position where they wanted to start branching out more into commercial deals, so both individual endorsements and also like team and club sponsorships, mainly in football, but also a few other sports. And it was a bit of a no-brainer for me.
So much to get into, like so much I'm fascinated about there, and actually like mad to hear like the whole story from top to the bottom. So very interesting and a lot to say out there. Like I guess the probably the first question that people have while listening to that is like, what if you want to get into sport, into the sports world, if you want to get into that industry, what would you say was the first step that got you there, and what should someone do who's listening who wants to get there?
Yeah, I always find it so surreal now that like I have people who will message on LinkedIn the same kind of messages I was sending back in 2020, where they just asked to like jump on a call. And I always say to them that, particularly because sometimes we're around a similar age, and I still see myself as young in the sports industry, like I'm more than happy to help them, because I feel like at this age you just have to help them. But what I was doing back in 2020 was getting a lot of no's, and people who were 20 years plus older than me having no time of day for me. They'd been in the sports industry for years and years. They learn how it works. They know that you don't really share trade secrets. It's quite a closed industry, and they didn't want to help me. But I did get some that said yes, and I can't even put a number on how many messages I sent, but I managed to get maybe 200 phone calls total over lockdown, with various people in different areas of football and sport. And for me, like, that was the most important thing. Like, if I could go back to it now, I would just forget really everything else and just purely speak to as many people as possible. And it was difficult during lockdown, but also like actually going out to meet them. As soon as lockdown eased, like I mentioned, I would go to these under 16 games in the freezing cold, because I knew there was like agents and scouts and stuff there, and I was meeting interesting people. And then I originally started by going to events, and then was fortunate enough to like run a few of the events, so could go for free, which was a lot easier on a student budget. But actually turning up at these like conferences and summits, etc., you never know who's going to be there. And every single opportunity that I've had come to me since is because I've met someone in person. I think that's like the most important thing. But just to begin with, to get on the phone to them, and LinkedIn is the most unbelievable tool that no one had 20 years ago. And I think the sports industry's developed so much because of LinkedIn, because it purely is about who you know rather than what you know, which is such a cliche thing, but like no one could really emphasize that enough to me now. And the biggest thing I would say is literally you can be anyone with any kind of background, and you can just, as long as you know people, you'll fly in the sports industry.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's like, it's been so interesting for me to observe that, because you contrast that with the corporate side, where it's very like, what university have you gone to, what grades have you got, and you know, there are things in place. They are in place for a reason to kind of filter people, but at the same time, it's been quite refreshing to see like you put your head down, graft, and get somewhere versus like having to have a first from Cambridge in maths sort of thing.
Yeah, I think at school, like they always banged on about like Russell Group universities, etc. And I always targeted Durham, yes, because of sport, but also because it was very like it had a good reputation academically as well. And I think when I got in, I was so like chuffed that like, yeah, I've got into Durham University. The grades to get in were pretty high. When I got them, I was buzzing, and I was like, okay, like this is perfect. This is exactly how I wanted to start. Not once, like during my time in the sports industry, has anyone asked what were my A-levels, where did I go to university, and like what did I get at university. I don't think 99% of the people I work with know that I went to Durham University, and like in my head, I saw that as such like a prestigious, like good achievement, and actually it's counted for nothing.
Yeah, and so interestingly on the network point, because I completely agree with the networking side, but I've been told by quite a lot of people like recently that maybe it's more the entrepreneur space where people want people to build things and then show them in a network. But why do you think people are so negative about networking in general?
Are they negative about networking in general?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think that's probably the space, like the kind of business space. People often say to me, like, networking's a waste of time. You should focus on building something and then network. But I think I'm answering my own question saying it's the entrepreneur space, not your space, right?
Yeah. Like to me, that whole idea and concept is mental. Like I didn't really know that there was negativity towards networking. I thought networking was something that goes across all industries because, you know, it makes sense that opportunities come out of nowhere. I think in sport, I say it's a closed industry. It definitely is. People don't want to share closed secrets. But if you can offer something to someone and bring some kind of opportunity, they're always going to want to speak to you. Like I really early on when I was looking at like Daniel G stuff, and he's got a fantastic book called Done Deal, which was one of the first like I read in the sports space well before I ever got in touch with him. He talks about in there, like you need to, if you want anyone to respond to you in the sports industry, you need to find a way to help them before they will even ever consider helping you. And I think that was something that I actually really stuck by quite close to. And then everything since then has always been like any networking opportunities I go to, if I'm able to help someone there in the room and figure out a way to help them, it's always ended up leading to some kind of opportunity, some bigger than others, of course, and some, you know, they're like not really relevant, but you just never know who you're going to meet in these rooms. So I would like find it crazy to shut yourself off from the opportunity of finding ways to like get in touch, help these people, and then see if there's an opportunity that obviously benefits me in the long run in like a selfish way of looking at it. But it works in both ways, because I think in the end of the day, for the next 20 years, the people that I'm meeting in the sports industry now that are in and around my age plus 10 years, say, they're going to be around as the top guys in sports for the next 20 years. So if I can find small ways to help them now and build up a relationship with them now, then that's going to benefit me, because you can never know everyone in sport, but the more people you know, the better, because then they can help you to get to know somebody else. And I think it's a bit of like an exponential growth thing that I've found just like trying to get to know as many people as possible. So the idea of not networking would be insane in sport.
It's mental. But I also think you've hit the nail on the head there, which is people network for the sake of networking. Like they just turn up at events and just hope that something will happen. Whereas actually the way that you network is by providing value and then offer it, like hoping to get value back. And there's more of a transaction there as opposed to it being like, nice to meet you, shake your hand and then kind of leave and just say you met someone.
No, you're absolutely right. And Daniel will love me like shouting out his book, but he is the one that says like find a way to help them before you ask for help from them. It was probably a really good lesson to have learned at that point. And is a key skill really to actually networking with a purpose rather than for the sake of it. Yeah,
I think that's spot on. I think we've single-handedly solved the networking problem there. I think that's that's a class shout. And then like just kind of finishing off on like one part that I'm so interested in is you are like 100% one of the most driven people I've met. What drives you? Like what keeps you working hard? I know, so nice, right? So nice. I'm only doing it because we're on a pod, mate. I'm only doing it because other people have to listen to this.
I'm glad I agreed to do this now. That was a lovely thing to say. My day's been made. It's a good question though. I think like genuinely, and it might be like one of those answers where like it's like cringy or cliche or whatever, but it genuinely is because I just love it. Like I don't see it as working hard, and I know like we always laugh about it, but like I will get up in a day and I will be having conversations about stuff which always begins with a like, oh, did you watch the game yesterday? Like, how many times today will I ask people, like, did you watch the England game yesterday? And stuff like that. Like, what did you do in your weekend? And we always talk about what sport we watched. And any conversation that, like, I would have that as a small talk with any of my mates, like anyone I turn up to, that's an easy conversation to have. And that's like the majority of the day of my conversations. It's not really work. And then you'll get into work with people who you're watching, like within these sports, playing every weekend, like you're seeing them in the press. Like, it's a whole crazy world that, like, I just feel I'm actually quite lucky to be a part of it, because I know it's like one of those where anyone you ask within the sports industry will tell you it's a really, really hard one to get your foot in the door. But once your foot's in the door, you can actually end up doing so much different stuff. Like, there's a load of opportunities that will come to you. So I've actually managed to get my foot in the door, I'd like to say at this point, but like, I'm only 24, there's a load of stuff I still want to do within the sports industry. So if I lost my motivation now, I wouldn't be able to capitalise on the opportunity that I feel like I worked hard for. It was the times when my foot wasn't really in the door, maybe it was like starting to creep through it, when I was like, okay, this is like really hard work. The motivation side was to get the foot in the door, and that was what kept me going. But that was a lot harder than it is now to motivate myself. I find it a lot easier now to motivate myself because I'm getting paid for stuff now, which I didn't for the first couple of years. And there's opportunities coming now, which I had to work for 3-4 years to get to. So if I lost my motivation now, then what was the point in doing all of that? Like, my motivation now is probably more than ever, purely because there's so many other opportunities that are coming every day, really. And there's never a point where I'm like, oh, like, what is there to do now? There's so much more. So it's very easy in that regard to actually keep my motivation.
Love it. Very inspiring to listen to, for sure. And nicely coming on to the last part, which is where we go now, Jamie. What are you going to be doing in 5 years' time?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. There's a few things at the moment where, like, I wouldn't have even dreamed of dealing with certain negotiations around certain opportunities that, like, I didn't think would ever come across my desk. But yet they're kind of like coming up now. And I just think, well, if these are happening now, in 10 years' time, I want to be doing like the major stuff. I've applied recently to the Next Gen Leaders program, which I did last year. Didn't get an opportunity with them. Applied again this year, and I'll keep applying until I'm too old. I think it's under 30s, and I'll keep doing it because I think to go into something like that puts you in such a good place for the next 10, 20 years. You know, if I could set like a really big goal, I'd want to be like one of the top guys in FIFA, but not a dodgy FIFA that is and has a reputation of being at the moment. I'd want to be like a part of it and actually making it like a really good organisation as to what it really should be, given its power over football. But not also just close to football. Like, I've always thought like I would love to be on the top guys at the Olympic Committee, for example, and stuff like that. I have goals where I want to be one of the big decision makers within like a big sports organisation or sports entity, and with hopefully the knowledge and experience I'll gain over the next 5-10 years, you know, it could potentially be a possibility. Another one to mention is that I would love to be like a CEO of a football club, or a sporting director, or someone that probably not on the football decision side of things, because I don't think I'd be very good at that, but more on like the business, finance, bringing in like commercial revenue. Like, I would like dream of that role. I mean, it's been in the news recently that Eddie Gasper's obviously leaving Arsenal, and someone I know very well in the sports industry, who I'm sure will be listening to this podcast, messaged me and said, "Are you ready to apply for this role yet?" And just to get a message like that, I was like, like, I'm not, obviously. I'm so far from being able to apply for Arsenal CEO, but I was like, I was sporting director. But in my head, I was just like, yeah, that would be the dream, and one day I would love to get there.
I love it, and I have no doubt that those things will all come true. So very exciting times. So as we finish off the pod, I somehow get to ask you the final question, which I haven't sent to you, but I assume you know about. So if you could go back to a time, say when you were in university and you were spam messaging Mesut Ozil's agent Erkut, what is one thing you do the same? What is one thing you do differently? And what is one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
Okay, so I'll try not to forget the questions, seeing as we came up with them. But I think what I would do the same is definitely saying yes to everything at the start. I think I came under a lot of criticism from parents, girlfriend during the time, maybe like from friends' thoughts as well, where they said like, I was being too haphazard. I was working for free a lot of the time. Like wasn't earning money. I was definitely losing money, and I was still taking on more and more projects. And for me in my head, it was just like, well, yeah, hopefully if I say yes to all of this, you never know what's going to materialize. And fortunately it did. So 100% what I would do the same is just keep saying yes. And even if it meant working for free for a couple of years. And then what I would do differently is actually quite a contradictory answer to what I've said for what I would do the same. But I think it's probably important to point out is actually be a little bit more aware of burnout. Because yes, I was saying yes to everything and taking on a lot of stuff. But going into my law masters particularly, there was days where I was waking up and then it would get to lunchtime and I couldn't remember if I'd showered and eaten. And that was the time I was like, okay, like my mum was saying like, yeah, you're burning out. And it was a really weird time. And I think it was, of course, it was my own doing. But I think it was because at that point I lost my priorities slightly. And I was trying to keep everything going when it was actually impossible at that point. So yes, say yes to everything. Like I said, I would do the same. But what I would do differently is be aware that there is a genuine limit where if it's affecting the quality of what you're doing, then you need to just be a bit more aware of that. So what I would do differently is still say yes to it all, but I would be aware that if I'm losing quality in the delivery of my work, then I need to change things, basically. And then what I would tell myself to motivate myself, I actually was going to say the quote that that Daniel did, helping others before they help you. But seeing as I touched on that in the podcast, I think what I would tell myself to motivate myself is just to not really live my life trying to please other people. Because I think there was a lot of times where there were so many distractions and I got FOMO of certain things. And then I was like struggling with working out where my priorities lay. I don't even know what the right English is there. But actually figuring out what was the most important for me to do at the time actually meant that some people wouldn't be too happy or too impressed with me, which at the end of the day, as long as you know which opinions matter and were conducive to what I was trying to get to, where I was trying to get to, then the rest of the opinions don't actually matter. And I know I had it on a scarf in my university room, and you pointed out a few times, Sol, but there was a scarf of my beloved Wigan Warriors rugby league team which said hated, adored, never ignored. So if I had to do it as a quote, I would do something like that, because at the end of the day, the more stuff you're doing, you're going to please some people, but you also might annoy other people. But as long as you're doing it in the right way, as a good person firstly, but also in a way that's going towards your goals, then I think I'd be happier. So I wish I told myself that right at the start.
Spot on, mate. Very, very, very good to listen to, and so many takeaways. But cool to just hear the whole story. Like, it's weird for two mates to sit down and me just ask you loads of questions about your life for 45 minutes. But fuck, like, it should happen more, right? It's weird that I didn't know so much about all that story, and like definitely answered a few questions that I had about the whole thing. So hopefully it's been really interesting for people to actually listen to this interaction. And I think, like, if there's, to not, Jamie closes his ears here, but he has done incredibly well for such a young age, and is like definitely an inspiration to a lot of other people who want to get into the space. So if you're sat listening to this and want to go into something that if you're listening on audio, then Jamie is doing the crying emoji. But yeah, he's definitely an inspiration, and I should be followed closely if you want to follow your passions, and is one reason why we got this podcast started in the first place. So Jamie, thank you so much for getting chucked into the story. And
very kind. I really enjoyed that, Sol. And yeah, in all seriousness, you did raise one really good point there, which is actually the fact that some people might be listening to this from university, and we lived together for a year of university and yet never really had like a conversation like this. And I think since we started doing the pod, we've had so many more like in-depth conversations around different stuff and careers. So anyone that's listening that might have 5 other housemates like you and I did that are doing various things in different industries, just like find out a little bit more about their career, and you just never know, but it might actually be quite an interesting conversation and an enjoyable one like this. So thanks, Sol. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Okay, so it's just me now for the takeaways, which is, again, hilarious. But it was great to chat to Jamie. And as I said, very inspiring. And I got 3 main things from our chat, but also from like knowing Jamie as a person. Okay, so the first takeaway that I got was that Jamie says yes to everything. Jamie is very good at spinning loads of plates, and while Jamie, like me, he mentioned at the end there that it has caused him a bit of burnout, in general the man does so many different things, and I think that's like a testament to all of the opportunities that he's had, because you actually never really know what is going to happen until you get to it. And I think Jamie is amazing at making sure that he attends and meets as many people as possible. So saying yes to everything and just doing as many things as possible is like one of my massive takeaways from Jamie. The second is the value of mentors. Like Jamie has managed to attach himself fairly early in his sports career to Mesut Ozil's agent, and also some big names in the industry, as he mentioned. And I think it's just such a hack for people at our age and people early in their careers to be able to find these veterans in the industry and how to actually attach and learn from them. Yes, he had to do free work. Yes, I was definitely one of the people that kind of was said, that's a bit interesting, like, are they just kind of using you? But I've come to realize the value in the free work, because he has managed to kind of become a massive part of Mesut Ozil's agent's life, and also part of the other mentors that he was speaking about. And that's all because he realized the value of attaching himself as close to these people, and the mechanism he did that is via free work. So that was really cool, and I think a massive takeaway for me. Okay, and then the last point, which I think Jamie drummed home quite a lot and is going to be an inspiration for a lot of people, is to work in what you love. And I know we say this almost every episode, and it's probably boring to hear, but genuinely, Jamie, I've observed, he wakes up and he works and he loves what he's doing. And that is, to me, one of the reasons that we spoke about starting this podcast in the first place, is because Jamie had something which caused him to work weekends and caused him to work like 12, 13, 14-hour days. And it's because he loved it. And there's nothing worse than being in a career where you have to work incredibly hard at something you don't like. So the biggest takeaway for me would be, find something that you love doing, where you don't care, where time flies by, and then go and commit to it, because it will be so much easier to commit to that than having to go, okay, I have to wake up for another day of work where I don't like what I'm doing, but I get to go and do something fun at the weekend. So that was like a massive takeaway for me, and a big takeaway, hopefully, for you guys listening. So yeah, great interview with Jamie, very inspiring and very interesting to actually sit down with a mate and chat about their career. Thank you very much for taking the time listening. I'm recording this on my own, but it's definitely a massive ambition of mine to be on the other side of the table, and I look forward to getting to that point in a few years' time. But for sure, thanks for sticking around, and we'll catch you in the next episode.